As one of the few to have faced the humans in combat and survived, Klax'var's perspective would be critical today. The destruction of the entire Garwek armada by a single human-made black hole bomb had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Fear and outrage gripped the Council at this brazen misuse of power. Klax'var entered the massive central chamber where Council members' pods hovered around the intricate concentric rings of the holographic projection sphere. He settled into his pod just as Supreme Chancellor Basriel called the session to order, his aged voice amplified throughout the hall. Esteemed Council members, we face a grave threat that cannot be ignored. The humans have demonstrated their ability and willingness to unleash doomsday-level weapons without hesitation or oversight. An anxious din filled the chamber as representatives voiced their reactions. Klax'var noted delegations already forming into factions, those adopting a militant stance against Earth, and those cautious of conflict. In his decades of service, he had never seen the Council so divided. After reviewing the classified intelligence on the black hole bomb Cornelius, Chancellor Basriel opened the floor to debate. One by one, Council members floated their pods into the center of the sphere to address the assembly. Klax'var listened with growing unease as counselors like the warlike Theriarch Leaks of Taurus Prime called for immediate strikes on Earth's arsenal before the humans grew bolder. When Empress Rylea of the ancient Scythian hegemony rose to speak, the chamber grew silent. Her tentacled head undulated as she declared in her musical voice, "These apes cannot be trusted with such power. We must remove the human threat before their recklessness destroys us all." Klax'var realized with alarm that a majority favored Rylea's aggressive stance. When his turn came, he guided his pod into the sphere, took a deep breath and addressed the Council. "Honored delegates, I have seen firsthand the courage and tenacity of the human race, but also glimpsed their potential for noble acts. Perhaps, if we initiated diplomatic discussions, an alignment could—" Klax'var was interrupted by mocking laughter from Rylea's pod. "Noble," she cried. "They devastated an entire civilization without warning. The humans respect only strength." Other hawkish counselors echoed her contempt. Klax'var struggled to sway them, but could see that fear and anger had hardened their hearts. His shoulders slumped as his pod returned to its original position. He had failed to make them see reason. The last speaker, Admiral Jor of the Navy flagship Valiant Justice, made an unexpected proposal, a direct, sweeping first strike to neutralize humanity's military power in one decisive blow before they could mount a defense. Gasps and shouts filled the chamber at this radical plan. In the vote that followed, Jor's offensive proposal failed to pass, but only by a dangerously narrow margin. As the Council disbanded in anxious discord, Klax'var pondered how he could possibly prevent a catastrophic war with these impulsive, ingenious, maddeningly audacious humans. Captain James Gibson gulped homemade moonshine from a grimy glass as raucous laughter filled O'Malley's bar. His unorthodox platoon of soldiers cackled with glee as news spread of the black hole bomb's success against the Garwek. "I wish I could have seen those alien bastards' faces when that bad boy went off," whooped Corporal Jones. His lanky frame sprawled across the table. Gibson just shook his head smiling as his squad reveled in the mayhem they had helped cause. This band of misfits had been assigned to Gibson for their blatant disregard of rules and penchant for chaos. However, their creativity and audacity in battle were undeniable. So under his steady guidance, they had become one of Earth's most effective, if unruly, platoons. Gibson's wristcom flashed with an urgent summons from General Curtis. After settling his rowdy soldiers at the bar with more moonshine, he made his way through the bustling city back to headquarters. The towering military complex loomed into view, bristling with cannon emplacements and anti-craft batteries. Gibson wondered if the Council would dare attack Earth directly even after the black hole feat. He found General Curtis reviewing star charts in the war room's cold metallic space. Curtis turned with a weary expression Gibson had never seen on the stalwart general before. "Captain, I have an extremely sensitive mission that requires your platoon's unique skills. We've intercepted Council communications indicating a strike on Earth may be imminent. We must ease tensions before we find ourselves embroiled in a disastrous war." Gibson straightened in surprise. "Sir, are you sure my soldiers are right for a diplomatic mission?" Curtis smiled wryly. "They certainly have unorthodox methods, but we need that unpredictability to catch the Council off guard. Only your crew stands a chance of changing their minds, Gibson." Gibson hesitated, then nodded resolutely. "We'll do our best, sir." As Gibson briefed his team on their assignment, he noticed Sergeant Andrews listening intently. Despite her rowdy exterior, she had a keen mind. Afterward, she pulled Gibson aside. "Are you sure about this, James? We're much better at starting fights than preventing them." Gibson grinned. "I know, Claire. But if peace is possible, we have to try." She held his gaze, then squeezed his shoulder. "Just watch your back out there," she said softly. Andrews always had his back, Gibson mused. As their shuttle prepared to depart for the Council station, Gibson noticed Andrews slipping extra ammo packs into her kit. His own doubts resurfaced. Would diplomacy be enough to contain the wild chaos that was humanity? Silently, he hoped this mission would not become their last stand. The stark white corridors of the Galactic Council space station felt sterile and confining to Gibson and his squad. As they were escorted through the maze-like interior, Gibson noticed his soldiers fidgeting anxiously. Their gear and primitive firearms looked out of place among the sleek alien technology. Finally, they entered the Council's grand chamber. Dozens of member species watched them warily from hovering pods as Gibson stepped into the center. Taking a deep breath, he began reiterating humanity's desire for peace. Mid-speech, a minor argument broke out between Corporal Jones and the Theriarch delegation. Insults were thrown until the Therian guards approached aggressively. Jones reacted instinctively, socking one of the reptilians right on its snout. The room erupted as Gibson's soldiers leaped into the brawl with whoops and hollers. He tried to restrain them, but the damage was done. The Council looked on, appalled, as security swarmed to break up the melee. Gibson stood in dismay as years of delicate diplomacy seemed to crumble. Thrown into adjoining holding cells, the squad tended their bruises while cursing the stiff-necked buzzkills. After conferring, Empress Rylea sentenced Gibson personally to a newly constructed maximum security complex. Escorted there by armed Scythian guards, Gibson was surprised to find Klax'var awaiting him. The Calarian had argued against imprisoning Gibson, believing he could still broker peace. The two debated for hours. Gibson explained that humanity saw no evil in daring exploration, whereas Klax'var argued such recklessness invited disaster. Yet gradually, they realized both species harbored misconceptions about the other. Perhaps our differences stem not from malice, but from divergent philosophies, mused Klax'var. Gibson saw past his rigid exterior to a thoughtful spirit. Just then, Rylea interrupted to announce Gibson's execution, deeming humans irredeemable. Gibson saw even Klax'var was shocked at this betrayal. As he was dragged away, Gibson locked eyes with Klax'var in a moment of shared dismay. Though peace had failed, mutual understanding had dawned. Back in their cells, Gibson's soldiers growled in anger hearing about Rylea's decree. Andrews refused to accept defeat. "We're getting you out of here, Captain, and then we'll show these overgrown squids what happens when you back humans into a corner." Gibson shook his head, trying to think clearly. He wished Klax'var were here to find a diplomatic solution, but perhaps that time had passed. Looking around at his loyal, fierce soldiers, Gibson realized where his duty lay, with his people. "You're right, Claire," he declared. "If Earth must stand alone, so be it, but we'll never bow in fear." His soldiers cheered, resolved to fight for their planet and captain to the end. Gibson squared his shoulders, ready to lead his crew in one final act of audacious defiance. Gibson's condemned cell was cold and barren, with no furniture except a slim cot, but his mind raced feverishly, strategizing with Andrews on their promised escape. The guards had confiscated their weapons and gear, but sheer determination fueled them. When the Scythian guards arrived to escort Gibson to his execution, they instead found only a gaping hole blown in the cell wall. Andrews tossed a cheeky salute before disappearing through the jagged breach. Chaos erupted as Gibson's soldiers rampaged through the station, improvising explosives from chemicals in the labs and blasting open doors with jury-rigged power tools from machine shops. They herded frightened alien civilians out of the hangar bays at gunpoint and hijacked their sleek council cruisers. "Let's see if these babies can dance," cackled Pilot Lieutenant Rose as he put the stolen ship through evasive moves, dodging pursuit from the station's defense grid. The squad whooped and hollered as they blasted off into space, Gibson shaking his head and laughing at their sheer audacity. On board, Gibson outlined a plan to assault the secret council superweapon hidden at Outpost Bravo 6, hoping destroying it would shock them to the negotiating table. But tension simmered among his soldiers, old grudges re-emerging. Andrews confronted Gibson about his relationship with Lieutenant Branson during their last furlough on Mars. Meanwhile, brawls broke out between Jones and the bitter Corporal Ruiz over lost comrades. Even easygoing Rose complained about risking their lives on a suicide mission. Just then, Klax'var's stern face appeared on the view screen. He had slipped tracker implants onto Gibson's crew during the firefight. "You will never defeat the Council's forces alone," Klax'var warned, "but I will convince them to open talks if you stand down your attack." Branson angrily cut off the transmission, but Andrews hesitated. "He's right, Captain. We need allies for whatever comes next." Gibson wrestled with his options, then made a decision. "No, we finish this ourselves or not at all." His voice softened. "I can't ask you to follow me any further." His soldiers exchanged glances, then one by one voiced their support. Ruiz extended a hand to Jones in reconciliation. Rose slapped the nav console with renewed commitment, and Andrews simply nodded, a lifetime of trust in her eyes. Gibson's heart swelled with love for his makeshift family. Come what may, they would face it together. He gave the order to jump to Outpost Bravo 6. Klax'var's warning echoed in Gibson's mind, but he shook off his doubts. Win or lose today, they were fighting to prove that humanity bowed to no one. The Council would reckon with his people one day. As the station's massive superweapon came into view, Gibson steeled himself. He had chosen his path. Now came the greatest test of audacity his squad had ever faced. Klax'var paced anxiously on the Council station's observation deck, awaiting the humans' arrival. He had warned Admiral Jor to stand down the Null Nova's fearsome defenses, hoping Gibson would accept a truce. Suddenly, proximity alarms blared as a lone human cruiser dropped out of warp speed. On the ship's view screen, Gibson's face appeared, gaunt but resolute. "This ends today, one way or another. Too much blood has been shed between our peoples." Jor bristled, but Klax'var silenced him with a look. "What are your terms, Captain?" Klax'var asked solemnly. Gibson's eyes flickered with surprise at the Calarian's conciliatory tone. Just then, Empress Rylea stormed onto the deck, fury twisting her beautiful face. "Destroy them!" she commanded Jor. "Fire the Null Nova now!" Klax'var watched helplessly as the massive sphere of the superweapon began powering up with a thrumming glow. He realized with horror that the humans had no chance once it unleashed its cataclysmic energy. "James, get your crew to safety!" Andrews cried over the channel, but Gibson shook his head, jaw clenched. "Full speed ahead. We end this on our terms." Andrews nodded grimly and grasped Gibson's hand in wordless camaraderie as they flew directly into the Nova's blazing maw. At the last instant, Gibson's ship wheeled nimbly aside, dodging the reality-shredding beam. The move caught Jor off guard, and the Null Nova's blast carved a molten scar across his flagship's hull instead. Howling in rage, Rilia ordered all ships to converge on the humans. What followed was a battle of elegance versus brute force, as Gibson's crew employed every scrap of cunning, imagination, and grit to overcome the Council's massive but conventional fleet. In a final act of defiant genius, they overloaded the Nova by feeding its beam back into itself, destroying it in a silent white explosion. As the smoke cleared, only the human ship remained, battered but victorious. On its view screen, Gibson stood with his equally weary but triumphant soldiers. "Your move, counselors," he stated simply. Stunned, even Rylia could not speak. At last, Klax'var turned to her. "The humans have proved their strength, but strength alone cannot rule forever. There are times when wisdom must temper power." The bitterness slowly eased from Rylia's face. With a deep sigh that seemed to draw on eons of history, she opened a channel to Gibson. "Let us discuss our alignment." Later, gazing out at the debris of battle floating past the observation deck, Klax'var pondered the future. Gibson joined him, both content with silence for a time. "Your people will bring great change, Captain," Klax'var mused. "I hope one day the Council will have 1/10 your courage." Gibson smiled thoughtfully. "And I hope one day we will have 1/10 your wisdom." They stood together, the best of their peoples, ready to forge a new path between humanity and the stars.